What sports?
Football, basketball, this stuff. Football. Basketball. I don't play no more sports.
That's what So, today, man, we just gonna give y'all a little knowledge. I mean, y'all probably think y'all know everything. I thought I knew everything. I'm a father. I'll give you my background right now. I'm a father. My son is 2 years old. Me and his mom do not get along. I'm the one to, take my baby all the time. And, it just don't work like that. So this is my program, man. I put my heart and soul into this, man. I really need y'all to listen and pay attention, God. Because I don't want y'all young cats to get in the predicament that I'm in. You know what I mean? Because it sucks. It sucks. Any of y'all got kids? Any of y'all about to have a kid? I know you about to have one. You know what I'm saying? And y'all might want to be careful, though, because, it's dangerous out here. What's up?
I ain't having kids. My grandpa was told, don't be sick, you got to do it.
Yeah, I thought so too. That's real. I thought so too. Yeah, I thought so too.
Diseases around there, you don't want kids running around.
Nice.
You can't support.
You're right. That's a good.
You gotta pay that child support.
I mean, y'all got jobs. You got jobs? Nobody else got jobs? You're a hustler.
I'm a landscaper.
Yeah, I know about hustling too. But that's cool. So right now we just gonna get started, man. We're gonna talk about domestic violence. That's gonna start off the program. And we have a representative from Eve here. This is Jill Storm.
Yeah.
And she's from Eve. She's gonna talk a little bit about domestic violence. Now, how many of y'all know what domestic violence is? What is it?
Anything that goes out against your family or something, assault, stuff like that.
Okay, okay,
I think the best violence is if somebody hit you.
okay.
You said domestic violence?
Yeah.
Like you put your hands on somebody?
Again, my name is Jill Pastor. I work for Eve. It's a domestic violence shelter program in Lansing. There's all kinds of different programs all around the state, but we just serve Ingham County. And basically, I just want to talk to you a little bit about relationship violence, domestic violence. I was really excited when you called me and learned a little bit more about Project Alpha, especially because domestic violence is often seen as a women's issue. And it's really, really important for men to get involved in this issue as well. Just some statistics, you guys are kind of right. Domestic violence does happen more frequently to women. 95% of victims of domestic violence are women. But there are male victims of domestic violence. And a lot of times the numbers that we have for those victims are really low because men oftentimes don't talk about violence. Can anybody think of why? Anybody have any reasons why?
What you say again?
Why a man might not talk about the violence that's happened to them.
This is my point of view. A dude talk about he getting beat up, I think that's gay.
No, he said why not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be maybe one reason why somebody might not talk about that violence.
Because they got pieced up.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't talk about it if I got pieced up.
Maybe embarrassed or don't want to tell anybody.
Lose race, not to express emotions.
Yeah, raised not to express emotions. So lots of different reasons why sometimes men might not talk about that violence. It's really important to know that domestic violence happens to 1 in 3 women, but it also happens to 1 in 9 men. So it's really not that far apart. And we're talking heterosexual men, not just gay men, although it does happen across the board. Domestic violence doesn't affect one group of people more than another. It's equal opportunity destroyer, meaning it goes across the lines. It's an international, global problem. And it happens by starting out with negative, unhealthy patterns of behavior within a relationship. Relationships are hard. There's lots of drama, right? There's lots of stuff that goes on. A lot of stuff that you think that you would never ever do. You get into a relationship and the ugly comes out. It really does. Domestic violence is about power and control. So it's not an anger issue. It's not something that somebody needs to be sent to anger management for. That's not going to help them. A lot of times that anger management is probably going to teach them other ways to be abusive because it's not a loss of control. It's about having control. It's about having that power in a relationship. And if you really think about power and control and how that extends to the world, it really can go even beyond relationships, right? Power and control exists in a lot of different ways in our world. So it's about one person having privilege, having that power, and using that against the other person. There's a lot of different handouts out in the hallway. This power and control wheel is something that we use to explain domestic violence. So these are some of the tactics that abusers will use. And we talked about the physical violence. That's kind of been in our news lately. We've been seeing a lot more with the physical violence, but there's a lot of emotional abuse that goes on too. And especially with men who are being abused, that's the way a lot of times that women are abused, is through emotional abuse. So it's a little bit harder to see. It's not as physical. It doesn't leave bruises. It doesn't leave you know, cuts and scrapes and all of that stuff. But it leaves a bruise, you know, on your emotions and on your self-esteem. And so when somebody is constantly putting you down, putting you down, putting you down, you start to internalize those things. And you start to think, well, maybe I am no good. Maybe I can't do this. Maybe I, you know, can't go on to be this great person. And basically I'm here to say that nobody ever deserves to be abused. Nobody. Period. There's nothing that you can do that deserves that abuse. There are other ways to handle conflict. There are other ways to handle things. And, you know, frankly in this world, we now have some things in place with the court systems that don't allow for that. Domestic violence is a crime. Even that emotional abuse, even if there's no bruises, if that person says that they've been in a domestic violence relationship, a lot of times they're going to be believed. Some of the tactics of control also include isolation. So, you know, when you're in a relationship, you a lot of times spend a lot of time with that person. And that's pretty normal. I mean, you're getting to know them. But what happens when you start losing those friends? And maybe some stuff's going on in the relationship, you have some drama that's going on, and you talk to your friend about that relationship and they say, leave. You know, you need to leave. What happens when you stay? You still have that friend? What's that?
It will keep going on like this.
And a lot of times it starts with little things. It starts with a name here, you know, a negative comment there, and then it kind of escalates into more and more things. Anybody remember that right after 9/11 there was a sniper that was out on the highway and he was gunning down people from the bushes? That was actually a domestic violence case. A lot of people don't know that. It came as a terrorist case, right? That this person was a terrorist sniper, but basically what this person was trying to do was kill his wife and make it look like he was a sniper. So that is a very, very extreme case of domestic violence, but you can see how it can start with just a couple of names here and there, and it can escalate over time into something that is much more serious. Using children, we're talking about fatherhood. A lot of times the children become a pawn in domestic violence. They become that person that is relaying information in between mom and dad. Dad tells the child to tell mom this, and then the child disrespects mom. We see a lot of kids in shelter that come in. We take kids all the way up to the age of 17. We really truly believe that you know, if you've experienced this violence in your life, there's a way to stop it. A lot of shelters have a cutoff point at 14 because they say, you know, young boys start displaying this behavior. We believe, you know, let's work through that because let's have some other skills. Let's have some other ways of dealing with this violence. Because there are other ways, and a lot of times people just don't know those other ways unless they try them. So we see a lot of people coming into shelter start to feel safe, and then they start to act out. They start to have some of those violent, tendencies, because that's what you learn. That's what you know, right? So with this power and control wheel, there are a lot of different ways that people are abusive. And it really does go beyond just that physical violence. Threats, intimidation. If I'm standing up here and I'm bouncing a basketball, am I threatening?
No.
What happens if I pick up a basketball and whip it at your head?
That's assault.
Yeah, you're going to be like, whoa, get out of here. And so what happens the next time I'm bouncing that basketball? Yeah, and I think, I better dodge out of the way because, she might pick that up and throw it at me. But, say this group over here didn't see anything that happened. I'm just bouncing a basketball, right? So it's hard to see it when you're not in it. And, well, actually, I'm sorry, I should flip it around. It's easy to see it when you're not in it, but it's hard to see it when you are. And so a lot of times people will say things like, well, why doesn't she leave? Why doesn't she? If he hit me, I'd be out of there in a second. You never know how you're going to react in a situation where you're faced with that kind of violence. You don't know. I mean, this is the person that supposedly loves you, right? So you don't expect that from that person. At Eve, we have a 24-hour crisis line. We have an emergency shelter for victims. We also have a children's program. We go out to middle schools and high schools and talk about dating violence and abuse. So we're always looking for more people to go out there and talk. It doesn't always have to be me. People don't come to our shelter and say, I'm a victim of domestic violence. They tell their friends. They tell you guys. So there's a lot of websites out there. There's a lot of information. Educate yourselves. Have those things to say to your friends. I mean, being a bystander is one of the hardest things to do. When you see it going on, what do you do, right? If you feel safe, say something. I've called the non-emergency number for the police. It's a way to not have to call 911, but still get a police presence if that's needed. There are a lot of ways that you can get help without involving the police. You can get a personal protection order. We have an office downtown where you can get a restraining order that basically starts a record on that person. All of our services are free. There's lots of information out in the hall, so please feel free to pick it up. There's lots of information online. I guess at this point, if you guys have any questions for me about domestic violence or maybe some of the things that you've heard about domestic violence. What's that?
What's the best way for males to not get caught up in it? On a big girlfriend, and a lot of us have girlfriends, and girlfriends, like you said, females can get to males, not physically, but they can get to us.
Yes. Yes.
So what's a good way for males, to all right, let me not get a case.
Really, I think it just comes down to keeping your behavior in check. Right now, it really is, the court systems are really heavily more towards women. So if a police officer shows up at your door, they know a lot of times the dynamics of domestic violence. So if you are being aggressive in any way, a lot of times you're going to get arrested. And, that's something to really keep in mind. Another thing is consent and alcohol. That's a huge one to talk about. If you're drinking alcohol, you cannot consent to sex, period. And that's for married people. When you are drinking alcohol, you cannot consent because you are in a different state of mind. So what I'm saying is that if you're drinking and if you're participating in some sexual behavior and that person says that they've been raped, a lot of times the courts are going to believe that. So that's something to really keep in mind. So when you're drinking, be really careful about what you're doing. Because it can come back to hurt you. It can come back to bite you. So really just keeping that behavior in check. Get involved, just tell your friends, that this isn't okay. You need to respect women. You need to respect each other. It's really about a people thing, right? We need to be respecting each other and trying to have that positive behavior. And, things happen. You know, people get in arguments. Arguments are not necessarily violent. Even sometimes yelling loudly is not necessarily violent. It's really about the power and the control that exists within that relationship. If one person is screaming and screaming and screaming and that other person feels scared, then that could become violent. But some people, you know, argue, and it's fair. It's about fighting fair. It's really, really about fighting fair. And compromising, trying to compromise and communicate your problems. Because what happens a lot of times is we have a problem with our partner, and we go talk to all of our friends, but we don't talk to our partner about that. So try to get in a safe space to do that. And if you can't, then maybe the relationship's not a good one. You know, maybe it's time to move on. But there are a lot of ways that you can get help talking to people as well. You know, if you have a child together and you got to make it work, you know, there are free services that work with both of those individuals.
So what you supposed to do? Say like you and a girl arguing or something, and like you trying to get some space, and she just won't leave you alone.
Walk away?
She won't leave you alone. She follow you.
That does happen.
Yeah.
Like, they just, I don't know, they just don't understand, like, a man needs, like, some time for himself to calm down, get his mind together, you know, and then we'll come back to the talk.
Right.
Niggas think we gotta talk like that, right?
And you know, that's a perfectly acceptable thing to do, walk away and have that time. And unfortunately, sometimes, you know, she's going to follow you. And she's going to say, I want to talk about it now. You know, physically, get in the car and leave, you know, if you need to do that. But yeah, I mean, it is difficult, especially when you're arguing about stuff, you know. And there's a lot of gray area with domestic violence. There's a lot of gray as far as, you know, is this domestic violence? But a lot of times it's really more that extreme, you know, when there's like physical coming into it and that kind of thing. But, you know, remove yourself from the situation and let her know that I need some time to cool down. And hopefully she'll respect that. I mean, it's not always the case, but...
Like, I don't see the point in arguing because all you're doing is yelling and screaming at each other, you know, when you guys ain't listening to what each other has to say.
A lot of times people say things that they don't mean or say really harsh things that they probably wouldn't have said if they weren't angry. And you can't take those things back. You know, you really can't take those, I mean, you can apologize, but you can't take those things back. You know, those kind of stick around. So, I mean, relationships are difficult, and there's always going to be problems. There are always going to be problems, even when you're married for a long time. You're still going to, I mean, you're constantly changing, so you're going to disagree about things. But it's really about fighting fair, trying to communicate those things, and try to do it when you're not in that angry mode. You know, try to step away, try to bring, it's hard sometimes to bring it up when things are going good, but sometimes you have to. Otherwise, it just always goes to that bad place. And then every time you're fighting about 25 different things because you didn't talk about it maybe when you were more calm. Any other questions? Or?
As far as the consent thing, is it just with alcohol?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's just with alcohol. But yeah, but that's something important to know because a lot of times, you know, when you're drinking alcohol, you're not really thinking clearly. You're not making those decisions, you know, the best that you can. So if the court were to get involved in that case, a lot of times you're going to get in trouble, you know, so it's really important to just check that behavior.
What about weed
Yeah.
You know, I don't really know. I'm not quite as sure, but I would imagine that there would be something in there for drugs as well.
So do you see like black just you ain't even drink alcohol?
Well, you know, the thing is that for a long time it's always been a he said, she said, right? Like with, and she's whacked and you're just chilling.
Hey, I got a question.
A lot of times, well, it just depends. It depends on the police officers, but sometimes victims do get arrested. Anyone know why? Can anyone think what?
One of the reasons why, during the 80s, domestic violence was not something that they really got into. And as it began to move into the 90s, you had some high-profile cases where one of the persons in the house, typically the female, was killed, or even the male was killed. And so they started to look at domestic violence a little more seriously. But now they have put into law, if they come out for the domestic violence case, then they have to make an arrest of one of the parties. So somebody's going to jail if the police are caught for a domestic violence case.
Yeah.
They have to?
They have to.
Yeah, one person has to go to jail. Yeah.
And that's to ensure that there's separation between the two and that nobody's going to that night get armed.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the reasons for that is that sometimes a police officer will come out to the house and maybe it's calmed down a little bit, and she's saying, well, I don't want you to take him to jail. I don't want you to get him in trouble. Because a lot of times they don't. A lot of times victims don't want to get that abusive partner in trouble. They don't want him to go to jail and have to deal with all that stuff. So they calm down, but this is the point where the police step in and say, no, we have to arrest one of the people in this situation. And they're getting a lot better at identifying which person that is.
They used to be mad at that time. Then when cops get here and everything, they about to take them to jail, and they start freaking out. Like, oh, maybe going to jail and all that. And they start like, when can you get out?
Right, right.
If a victim is arrested in this case, are they actually charged?
It depends. It really just depends on the situation. A lot of times they don't. A lot of times they'll kind of identify which person is that abusive partner and try to get that person help. And there's help out there for abusers too. There is better programs that focus on anger management and a little bit different side of anger management, more of the power and control stuff. But they really only work if that person is willing to learn. And so a lot of times batters are court appointed to go to those programs, and sometimes it doesn't work out as well because they're not ready to change. You have to be ready to change. So. And our 24-hour crisis line number is here. If you ever just want to talk to somebody about what you're seeing, if you have a friend who's going through an abusive situation, you don't know what to do, give them this number. It's a local number. It's free. All of our services are free to the community. And like I said, we have a ton of volunteer opportunities. So if you want to ever get involved in this work, talk about domestic violence, we'd love to have you. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, we learned about domestic violence. I actually have a question. So, when the domestic violence happens or whatever, someone get called, who usually goes with the police officers?
Yeah.
Why you think that?
They're going to think that they the aggressor of the problem.
Correct. Yeah.
I was with the main one, and then, because they have, like, they can go to car as a woman.
So we just learned about what's one or two things that y'all can take home. Like, look, dude, I'm saying, I know, baby girl, getting on your nerves, but dude, you gotta do what? Can't call the cops. Oh man, that's what you take out of it. Why would you ain't got any?
Even if you put your hands up, they have no right.
Dude, I just ignore it and walk away and then just wait till I calm down.
So any of y'all got y'all own little spot where y'all can be like, all right, look here, look, I'm about to go here. Oh, you gotta get an hour, and then we come back and talk about it. Or are y'all, or what's y'all spots? My brother house.
See, right now I can't go nowhere. If I would like go to my friend's house, chill with my homies, and then come back, talk about it.
Good answer.
Yeah, I just take a little while, think about the situation.
So any of y'all got shorties? That's crazy. More than one? No? No players. All right. I'm just asking because, when I was your age, I ain't really have to deal with it. But when you come to college, you kind of, you're fresh, am I lying? You kind of, when you come to college and you get in a relationship for more than a year, you be like, That's what I'm scared. You getting on my nerves. You getting on my nerves, bro. Come on, let me go play Madden or something.
And I think that's something that's really important is that, you know, you have a right to have your own friends, your own things that you do outside of that relationship. You don't have to be with that person all the time. And it's important for her to have her own friends too. And have her own things that she does outside of that relationship. Because there comes a point where you don't want to hang out with each other anymore.
Okay, anybody can answer. Like, you know, is it like a grace period? You know, when you start off, when you're in a relationship, it's like a good time. And then, I don't know how many months. First couple of weeks, first couple of months, you be like, oh. Well, cool. So since we talked about domestic violence, what do y'all think the role of a man is? Yeah.
To walk away.
Okay, walk away.
Handle the situation before you
Everything. What you mean?
Everything fall back on us if we don't do what we're supposed to.
So, off of domestic violence, what's the role of a man in society?
Take care of us,
Take care of his
guide
kids.
them, take care of your wife. We gotta do everything. We do everything. That's it. Unless it falls back around, it don't fall back around.
You want to think about what you should do. What's the best option you can do so no one gets in trouble a lot.
Anybody up there? What y'all think the role of a male is in society? Anybody?
I mean, it's weird because she has spoke briefly about power and control, and normally in society, the male has to know how to, you know, keep the top control and the power and manage it, and like that's a very difficult task for, you know, especially a young male to be able to balance that power and control it. So you have to be able to.
Anybody else? Paris?
Alright, I'll say the role of a man is to basically just stay true to his word, basically, and really just stay true to his community. And that's one thing that as a community, as society now, is one thing we don't do. Not even just taking care of your kids and stuff, but even being like, you know, a brother to your fellow man or something, you know, really looking out for the man right next to you. So I feel as a man, you really need to take care of each other as well as yourself.
So, we're about to move into another section. I have one more question. How many of y'all had to grow up without a